Afternoon. Okay, let's do this. You may hear some beeping in the background. They're doing construction over there, and for some reason they like to just drive a skid steer in reverse all the time, so it beeps a lot. So if you hear it, I apologize for that. But let's go ahead and move on here. Let's see what we got going for us. Cool. So yeah, today we're gonna cover session hijacking, or the beginnings of it. I'm gonna kind of try to run through it pretty quickly. But first, I do believe that we need to talk a little bit about identity. For those students that were in class, we had a guest lecture that day. I had Matt Lee, who's cybersecurity guy whose specialization is identity, come in and guest lecture on what identity is. I'm going to give a very high level TLDR. I didn't add any slides to this deck, but I can cover it. From our perspective, identity is who a person is, right? Like, we care about tying identity to a human. And there are three components of that we care about. The first of which is authorization, right? So from an identity standpoint, authorization is the practice of showing that you are who you say you are, right? Like, it is somehow proof of that you are an identity, right? It could be a password, right? But generally we consider three things as far as proving authentication, and we use some subset of them. The first is something you know, something like a password, right? The second would be something you have, which would be like an MFA device, or I got my handy dandy YubiKey here. It could be a YubiKey. I got another one over here. I think I own like 8 YubiKeys now at this point. And the third one could be something you are, right? Like, biometrics fall into that category. The fingerprint, face, right? Like those, that is something you are. And multi-factor authentication tends to be a group of the two of them, right? Like, so you could have something you know, like a password, plus something you are, like a human, right? It could be something you know, like a password, something you have, like a YubiKey or a token, right? Or even in the case of something like passwordless, right? It could be something you know, or something you have, which is the device itself that's receiving the push prompt, and then something you know, which is the MFA code that it gives to you that you end up having to enter back in, right? Like, there's all sorts of ways. But what happens when you authenticate? When you authenticate, in most cases, because HTTP is stateless, you're given some sort of token to prove you are who you are, right? That could be a session cookie, it could be a JWT, it could be any number of things. And then later, we exchange that token for the idea or the thought that we have authorized, right? Or that we have authenticated. The second A in that AAA, so there are three A's. The first one's authentication. The second one is authorization, right? And authorization is concerned with what you have access to, right? Whereas authentication is driven on who, or proving that you are who you are. Authorization says you are, or you have rights and access to the thing that you're trying to get to. And then the third one is auditing, right? Like auditing logs, authorization, and authentication records, so that we have some auditability of them later. Again, this was a really high level view of what identity is, but for the sake of this argument here and what we're discussing, what we really care about is that the token or session cookie you get is not the identity, right? Like, it is a token that is exchanged for the fact that that identity has authenticated, and that will become relatively we'll describe why that matters here shortly. So our goal here is to talk about what sessions are, right? Like, the goal is to talk about why they exist, right? And where the trust lives here, right? And from a high level perspective, what a session is it is a methodology for maintaining state. And we've talked about this several times in this class. It's one of the core concepts that I keep trying to drill into everyone's head, is that identity in this case equates state. And the session equates state. So the session is a thing that that web systems use to show or to maintain state, because as we've covered multiple times, and sorry, I'm digging up my notes here. Is it to make sure I'm not forgetting anything on this slide? So I'm kind of stumbling a little bit because I can't apparently walk and talk at the same time. Yay. So the idea is here, right? Like that we want to understand why sessions exist, where the trust in sessions live, and then basically how that ties to identity and how we reuse it, right? So from a key perspective here, and I realized I was getting my ahead of myself trying to explain that, so I'm not going to, and I'm going to stop and back up, right? Like, so for today, we're not going to use any tools other than the browser. We're not going to use Kali. We're not going to use Burp. We'll talk about those next time, which is a lecture I'll probably record tonight. And we'll go through those. So where are we, right? This is a little bit of a recap here, right? We've gone over what HTTP request and responses look like. We've gone over what client server architecture looks like, and we've talked about last class, and I just covered it briefly, what authentication versus authorization looks like, right? So today we ask, how does the server remember who you are, right? Like, how do we tie this back to, going back to the book in chapter 3, right? Like, after login, where does the identity live, right? Like, you're probably wrong in what you think it is. The identity still is the human, right? But we get this token as part of the session that indicates that, like, basically binds the your browser to that identity and the fact that it's logged in. So what is a session? So a session, again, represents the server-side state, right? Like it represents the core tenet of anything that the web server needs to remember about your user, right? Like, and this can be done a number of ways, right? Like in some cases, we may see something like a session cookie that ties that state to either authentication or some sort of backend database. That may store other information, including like what user you are, other things like that, right? It could be a JWT or some other actual client-side token where all of that information needed to make those authentication decisions, including what roles you have and everything, are contained in a signed and or encrypted cookie that is passed back. Another thing it could be, in the case of older .NET apps especially, is it could be as simple as something, a hidden form field in the browser page. .NET famously uses machine keys to sign view state, and that view state serializes the entire internal state of the application and is sent back to the backend server with every call. Right, and there have been a number of weaknesses that have popped up and have existed essentially because of weaknesses in those machine keys. As it turns out, a bunch of people copy and pasted them off of Stack Overflow, so a bunch of web applications use the same one. Not great. Sorry, this is probably noisy. Cool. So typically, from the back end here, we store that identifier as a cookie on the client, right? And this is all we're going to factor in right now. As we get to cross-site scripting and other things, we might poke into that a little more. But for the purposes today, we're going to consider it a cookie. Now, what's interesting about cookies? They are client controlled. Right, so who can see and modify them? The client can. And if you think about it, we probably can think of where this is going. So it is worth noting that a session is not a login, right? Like after login, we've already sent our username and password. We basically said, hey, username, here's my username and password. I'm going to give it to you now. And then the server goes, cool. Yep, those are valid usernames and passwords. Hey, give me this thing next time. Right, and if you give me this thing, then I'll know who you are, right? So we trade the authentication process for a token or session that is then used to validate us on the back end. Typically, we do not re-authenticate, right? Your browser isn't sending the username and password with every request. It's sending the session cookie, right? So possession of the token, in this case, equals the identity, right? It is the identity. And this is a very key thing here, right? Like, again, it is not, the identity is the human, right? But the token allows me to say, you know what? I proved I was that human. So trust me, bro. And that is what we're going to abuse here. So what does a typical flow look like? The user logs in, right? The user sends the server, right? So the user puts their username and password in, they send it to the server validates them, does authentication, does authorization to verify that they're actually able to access that app, right? Then the server creates a session record, saves it, and then the server ties that session record to a session identifier. They send the session identifier back to the client as a cookie, and then all future requests typically will send that cookie back, and that cookie is used to tie back to the identity in the end. So where can we break trust here, right? So in the end, the session spans the browser, right? Like, because it's sending the cookie, right? It spans the network because it's transiting the data, and it is also present in the server there, right? So where can we break trust? We can break trust in any one of these areas. The browser can send different values, right? The network we can hijack or man in the middle of it and change it there. Or if we can get access to the backend server, we might be able to modify the session directly. Right, this ties directly to the client server model that we're talking about here in this class, right? So in the end, when we talk about session hijacking, what we care about and what we're discussing here is the fact that we're abusing the misplaced trust that says, hey client, I know you're going to be a good human and you're only going to give me session tokens that you actually are verified to give me or allowed to give me. So we talked about this briefly before, right? How our sessions normally transited back and forth, right? Like cookies is most common way we do that, right? Every once in a while you'll see it via URL parameters. Every once in a while you'll see it via headers, and every once in a while you'll see it via hidden form fields, right? From our standpoint here, we're going to care about cookies, right? This is what's in scope today. We'll talk probably about JWTs and APIs later and how those matter, right? And it gets a little more complicated when we go there, but we're starting pretty simple. So what is a cookie? Well, a cookie contains a number of things. It contains a name, right? Like, okay, what is the name of this cookie? Or maybe it's session, maybe it's PHP session ID. It contains a value, right? You can put any arbitrary value in it. It contains a scope. That scope consists of a domain and a path. You can scope things down so that they can only be given certain ways, and it contains a number of flags. Security flags in particular, one of them is HTTP only, right? HTTP only basically says that only HTTP. This cookie is only valid to be sent via HTTP. It cannot be accessed via JavaScript, right? That is one way we'll mitigate cross-site scripting, which we'll talk about. Well, we're talking about it in class today, but we're going to talk about it in these videos probably later this week. There's a same site, right, which indicates like where we're allowed to send the cookie back to based on the domain. And then I believe there's a secure flag. I was taking a look here. Yep, there's a secure flag which indicates that we won't send the cookie over HTTP. It can only get sent over HTTPS, right? So those are security flags that are relevant. As we go into cross-site scripting, we'll see, importantly or notably, where we really can use the HTTP only flag to kind of cut this down. So I'm gonna give a quick demo. In the demo, I'm going to use DVWA. I believe we talked about that briefly. It's Damn Vulnerable Web App, and I'm only going to use browser dev tools. It's probably going to be a little hard to see as we go through it. So what is DVWA? As I just said, it's Damn Vulnerable Web App. It's a free application that can show vulnerabilities. We'll use another one, Juicebox, right? Like the nice thing about it is that we can... it is intentionally vulnerable, right? So it gives us a good playground to use. So I am going to cut to a browser, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate some things. Now, some of this is going to be movie magic because of the difficulties with me sharing screens here. I'm going to end up logging in other browsers that are off screen for you that you can't see. But you'll be able to see what happens here when I do that, right? So without further ado, let's cut to the let's cut to the browser. Cool. Let me find it. Rearrange my windows here so I can still see myself recording. Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna reload this page. Okay, I guess I'm still logged in. Cool, that's neat. I thought for sure it would have logged me out by now. So I'm gonna go ahead and clear this tab here. I think there's this button here. We'll clear that. Cool. So I am logged into DVWA as admin. I'm actually going to log out because I don't want to start logged in as admin, and I'm going to log in with a default username. I ended up creating an additional user that the slide originally had here. Unfortunately, people press the button, and when they press the button, it resets the database, and when it resets the database, I lose access to it with that account. So we're going to use accounts that are built in now. Let me see. I think I want to log in as Gusto. No. And that beeping is here. Yay. Okay, cool. So we have Gordon. Blah. Sorry. Probably should have looked up this password before I harassed all of you. That way you're not waiting, because I really don't want to have to cut this. So we are going to, let me try this, Gordon. Nope, it's not that username. There it is. Okay, cool. So it is Gordon B. It might be Pablo let me in. Let's try that one. Yeah, there we go. Cool. We'll just use Pablo. Cool. So we're logged in as Pablo now. Pablo is a user, right, in this thing, right? So you can see the things here, right? But notice, in what I want to note over here is that we have a bunch of web requests that were made here, right? Like, so what we can see is we hit login.php, and I'm going to, let's see if I can make this bigger. Look at that, I can. Okay. Well, it comes with the side effect of making everything else smaller, so I'm just going to shrink this. Okay, so we did a post to dvwak8bfn.org login, right, with the following parameters. User Pablo, login, let me in, a user token, and login. However, if you look at the request, or the request headers, which are down here, you can see we also sent a couple of cookies. One is, these are Cloudflare, the app session and authorization. That's probably a JWT, but of note here, we sent this PHP session ID, right? This PHP session ID is the session ID that is associated with our session. So once we do this login, we can see we got a response back. That response is a 302 that goes back to, there should be a location down here, right? It goes back to index.php. Then we load index.php, and you can see down here that we hit we again send our PHP session ID. So as long as our session ID, which is right here, as long as this session ID is present in all of our requests, then we can authenticate as a user, right? Like that is present here. So if I hit the logout page, in theory I'm logged out, that should have deleted the cookie, right? So if I go back to the index page, I should no longer see the cookie. Okay. However, because we're on low security, if I go to applications here, right, and I go to our cookies, I can see that I still have a PHP. This may not work. Let's see. Yeah. I betcha if I look, no, it says security's still low. It should have actually accepted that session because on low, I didn't think it was supposed to, it does invalidate the session ID. However, it doesn't issue a new session ID. We keep the same one. On impossible, you actually get a new session ID. But notice that the session ID stayed, right? Like what was forgotten is the backend database entry that we were actually logged in. But now, off camera, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another browser, and Firefox in this case. And I'm going to log in as admin. Wait a second here while it goes and finds my, while Cloudflare emails me the code to get in. And unfortunately, if you're following along and you're not a student, you won't be able to play here because I'm very afraid of giving random strangers access to my DVWA box because it's designed to be hacked. So now in another browser window, I've logged in as admin. I'm going to go into DevTools here on this browser. I'm using Firefox over here to do that. So I'm in Developer Tools. Over here, I'm going to go and get storage, cookies, and I'm going to grab my session IDs. I have that session ID, right? So going back over here to where I care about, the one that we're working on, you can see that our session ID starts with 475, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to paste in this session ID, which starts with FBDC. And that session ID is associated with the other session where I logged in as admin. So notice down here that I am logged in as Pablo. What happens if I reload the page now? I am suddenly logged in as admin. By doing this, I have successfully stolen the session token that the users in question were using here, and we have replayed it on this session and become the user who owned that token. Right. So going back to the slides here, what does that mean? Right. So what just happened? Well, the server trusted a value that the client gave it. Right. It did not reevaluate the identity. It did not reevaluate I am who I said I am. Right. I sent it this, like, instead of sending it this orange token I sent it this blue token. And I said, hey, you know what? Hey, I'm blue guy now. Right. And it said, hey, cool. Nice to meet you, blue guy. You're admin. Go ahead and do your thing. Right. So the assumed possession of that token means that I'm the same user. So if we can get a hold of that token, we can become any user. So what can we do with that, right? So I would, if you're in class, go ahead and try to do it yourself. If you're not in class, then you know what? You don't get to try it. You could stand up your own DVWA and you could walk through that same demo. That username and password that's listed there will not work in our DVWA. Use Pablo and let me in. So of note, like the thing that I wanted to cover there is what matters there is if I can get a hold of that session ID, in almost every case I can prove that I'm you. In class, when we talked about identity last time, Matt demonstrated grabbing it with a EvilGenix proxy to grab an Office 365 token, and was able to successfully use that Office 365 token to reauthenticate as an Office 365 user. We did it via video because Microsoft very much protects against that and does a lot of work to make sure that it doesn't work. But what did we learn as we go through this? Well, where is the identity stored? Like, where is it stored? I mean, think that through. The identity is the user, right? But the identity is actually stored server side in this case, right? Like the identity is stored. It's stored in it is stored in the that relationship between the user and the backend. So it is stored in the session, right? But how does that change if we have multiple servers? Well, in some way we need those servers to sync that identity, right? Like in the case of .NET, the common thing there is that the servers have to have the same machine key, and the vulnerability is that that machine key is used to show that, or it's used to encrypt that session state. Well, because everyone grabbed the same machine key from Stack Overflow, or there were defaults used, you could decrypt and change those sessions, right? And there have been a number of vulnerabilities recently because people are doing that. Right. So what assumptions do the server make? Well, the server makes the assumption that if you have the token, you are the user and you've done the needful thing, right? Like you've done the thing that needs to be done. And what can we do with that? Well, if we can get a hold of a session, we can become the user. I will tell you pretty openly that this isn't a great attack, right? Like this is neat and it's novel and it's a building block that we're going to use as we go through other things, but alone this isn't all that useful because it's actually pretty hard these days to get a hold of those session tokens unless you steal them via some sort of man-in-the-middle reverse proxy. So why was it hard to do it via browser tools? Well, they're manual, they're error prone. We can't really automate them. We probably could via JavaScript, but that's kind of gross, right? And it's difficult to scale. If I wanted to try, brute forcing session IDs, which is pro tip, something that the students are doing in the CTFD lab that I stood up, then you would have to, do it one by one, and it doesn't work, right? It works for the simplest case, but not beyond that. Right. But it's very important to me that I show that in the end, all of these things can be done manually, right? Like tools are for convenience. Tools are not required. They are things that we use to make our lives easier. So why does it matter, the tools? Well, real attackers automate, they replay, and they test variations. We should be curious, right? Manual does not scale, so next time we're going to go to tools. So looking ahead, I'll likely record this tonight. We'll see how the rest of my morning goes to see if I can get it up and ready. And we're going to do the same thing again next session. It'll probably be even shorter. It took me the entire class period to get through it, but it was mostly working through Cali with them. And actually, my lecture today, we're starting with it again. Yeah, there's no reading. If you're following along at home, feel free to, play with DVWA. You can comment if you have any questions. And that's it. Thank you. See ya.